On the path to decarbonization, and beyond getting an EV, our next big question is home installation and heating. Today we take a look at our 1930s house in suburban Kent. It's a partly extended semi-detached, like there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions in the UK. We go through the quote we received from Octopus for an air source heat pump, which is one of the options we are considering to modernize our home. So, what are the two issues we are trying to solve for? Well, number one, our conventional boiler system is getting long in the tooth. It is far from delivering modern comfort. We've had the odd leakage, the water flow is poor, the shower downstairs is only trickling. So, not great. In fact, I remain puzzled by the complexity of all these water tanks and all those pipes for just the one house. Number two, so second issue, our yearly consumption of energy and therefore the carbon production feels massive. We use 16 megawatt hours of gas a year. To put that in context, this is enough energy to drive the family around for 100,000 kilometers in the year. I also estimate it's about 3.5 times as much energy as what we needed when we used to live in a flat, a modern one, sure, south-facing, okay, but using electricity and electric radiators for heating, and that was all year round. So it feels really hard to justify such a big gap, 3.5 times as much. When it comes to deciding our next move in an old property like this, it feels like a bit of a jungle. Insulation is far from straightforward, it can be very costly too. We certainly can do more by installing new windows, for instance, but wall or floor insulation, they're daunting, expensive, and frankly they could be risky if you end up trapping moisture inside the house. On the heating front, you can get the full spectrum of recommendation. You've got the plumbers that love their combi boilers, you've got those that believe in a future in hydrogen, and of course there is our own temptation to go for modern tech like heat pumps and mixed energy, hot water tanks and TPOs, etc, etc. And that's probably from binging a little bit too much fully charged videos, but never mind that. Let me know in the comments what steps you have taken in your house, especially if you have converted from a vented system to a pressurized system for hot water. I'd like to know how it worked for you, and if you share your experience, that'd be wonderful. All of this to say that today we are looking at a survey done for a heat pump, and it was done by Octopus. As a customer, I'm quite a fan of Octopus. They've got great tariffs. I'm on Octopus Go and it's perfect if you've got an EV. They give you all the data to monitor, which is great for geeks like me. But beyond the basics, they do seem to be very innovative and they invest massively in new technology and partnerships. So I would think they would know what they're doing and that they would be training their engineers properly if they were to undertake a heat pump install. So no, it's not a sponsored video, by the way. If you do need a referral link and you are looking to switch, feel free to use my own referral link, but that's how far as it goes. So let's take a look at the quote now. It took a few hours and the engineer did a very diligent job there, looked very professional to me, but let's see what they came back with and try to cross-check the numbers. First things first, the cost is going to be 13.5k. Doesn't surprise me, and you will see there's an awful lot of work and materials for that. There's a £5,000 grant, which we qualify for, that's good, and of course it would be MCS certified, that's fine. All of that, no real surprise, maybe on the higher side compared to what I would hope for, but no major issue there. The deposit, you pay 10% up front. Again, doesn't seem completely outrageous to me. So what is the cost including? Well, one thing that's quite important is you need to have an EPC that is valid, and the loft or cavity wall insulation needs to have been done, which is our case, so that's fine. Interestingly, let's talk about energy costs as they anticipate them to apply to this heat pump. Now, I don't have the Octopus 12 months fixed April tariff, right? So that's just an illustration, and I'm going to come back to the actual costs I'm anticipating. But one thing that is very important here is that they are using the 4,780 kilowatt hours. So you can see a ratio of about 3 times less energy being used. And by the way, you can immediately sense that if you're using 3 times less energy, and yes, it might be more costly energy, electricity is typically much more costly, still the case today, than gas, well, it has to be a bit more eco-friendly, isn't it? Because not only you're consuming 3 times less energy, but also some of that energy has been produced through renewables. All right, that next one is quite important. Will I still be able to heat my home just as well? Of course, it has to be the case, right? So as we'll see in a second, it's dimensioned for the temperature that would be minus 3 degrees Celsius outside, and therefore it has to be the case. What if something goes wrong? Well, 2-year workmanship warranty, 5-year manufacturer warranty for the heat pump. That's not amazing, because one of the key principles is that it's supposed to be lasting longer than a boiler. So that's not very long. You do have to hope that it works. Now that's one of the reasons I would be taking an Octopus, for instance. You would hope that they're going to be there in a few years from now. This is super interesting now because you get to the details of what makes up the price. The first thing is the Daikin heat pump, about £3,000. Not very surprised. It's an 11 kilowatt version, so it's a probably slightly more powerful one. I think there are some at 6, around 6 kilowatts. You do get a new hot water system. You get radiator upgrades, and you'll see the whole page of radiator upgrades. It's quite impressive, quite massive, the upgrade that's needed. Plumbing components, again, not very surprised that there would be £1,000 there, and then some electrical installation. You can see it is a major undertaking, and £5,600 end-to-end installation services. Well, it's really hard to judge. I assume it's going to be a few days of work, but how many people, how much, overhead, desk, project management, whatever, I don't know. It's hard to tell. It does seem like an awful lot of money, so that must mean there's quite a bit of work. But equally, this is probably where you see the margin in all of that. I don't expect there's much of a margin on the heat pump, because if you just Google for that kind of product, I don't think you get £3,000. So all in all, it doesn't seem outrageous given the amount of work that you can sense from all of that. But of course, it's still a very large sum of money, especially if you're going to compare to what a boiler would be. A combi boiler is maybe £3,500. Okay, so that's pretty much what we get from this particular document. And there's a cancellation period and all of that. You get your certificate. Yeah, that's it. I think that's pretty much it. Actually, there's one more thing that is quite interesting at the end, which is the schedule of responsibilities. And you can see that if you have to do a supply upgrade, in other words, something related to the consumer board, I expect, that would be your responsibility. The customer needs to ensure areas are cleared for access. You would expect that. And then cosmetic work. That's something to be slightly mindful of. What kind of mess is left. So decoration, making good, is left to the customer. So the rest, plumbing work, electrical work, system commissioning, gas installation, all the stuff that matters, they're doing. But again, what kind of state does it leave the house in? I don't know, right? It's hard to tell from this. Right, so we now get to the performance estimate, a very key document. What do we see here? We see again the reference of the Daikin supply for the air source heat pump, 11 kilowatt, as we said, 50 degrees Celsius. So I think typically for the heat pump systems, you try to get, of course, that colder temperature than what you would do with a normal combi boiler. Although I understand legislation will be such that moving forward, 55 degrees Celsius is the normal temperature to dimension your system. So this is going down as well, even on gas boilers. The essential number, which is this SCOP number, this kind of magic factor, if you put 1 kilowatt hours of energy, then you're getting back 3.5. So you can see it is 3.5, which I think is quite classic from what I've heard for the heating. And then I suspect the 2.77 lower on the hot water is because it is also using the immersion heater once a week. So in other words, it's getting a 1-to-1 ratio sometime during the week when it's essentially heating up a bit higher to make sure that the water is still drinkable. So 200 liters hot water cylinder, that's what I would have expected. They compare the performance to that of a boiler that would have been 94 to 2007. Again, sounds about right. 87% efficiency as the baseline. Yep, that's my guess as well. So what have we got in terms of the reference for the performance? So they've used the EPC numbers for heating and hot water. And as we have seen at the start, these are pretty much the numbers we actually incur, or at least those that we did incur in the last year. Now, because of the factor, the magic number, the 1 kilowatt hours gives you 3.5, you get these 3.6 kilowatt hours of heating and then 1.1 of hot water. I think for us there is a question of whether we'd be able to offset some of that electricity use and use more the immersion heater at night, so that some of it is going to be during the night, and that would be another way to save a bit more money. You then get the electricity consumed as a function of the flow temperature. So I think the whole game on heat pump is that you're trying to reduce as much this water temperature. The lowest the temperature, the more efficiency you're going to get. So you might be heating for a longer period of time, but you get better efficiency. So in other words, you are going to be lowering your energy consumed. So you get more towards the 3,000 rather than the 4,000 kilowatt hours per year if you manage to run it on a lower flow temperature. And that's the table that we get all the way from 4.5 multiplication factor, the magic number, the SCOP number, at 35 degrees Celsius, and only in the 3 something at 55 degrees. One of the key questions here is, are we not gonna be cold? Now, we have done our own estimate as well, very rough, right? Through 2 different approaches to try to estimate the losses of the house. The first method was simply to say, look, I know there are brick walls, I know there are double glazed windows, some loft insulation. So I use the so-called U values for each surface area in the home, and then I essentially do the sum of all those losses, and that gives me a number. That's method number 1. And method number 2 actually looked at how much we consumed last year versus how much temperature difference there was with exterior temperature. And very interestingly, and that could be very much luck more than science on this occasion, I get to a very similar number, about 10 to 11 kilowatts would be this consumption of the house when you have a 24 degrees Celsius temperature, which is how they dimension the system here. So I think that's quite interesting, right? Because being able to get a similar number, that gives me some confidence that they didn't completely make up the numbers and that it's not going to be either over-dimensioned or under-dimensioned, especially in a house that, as I've said at the start, is not well insulated overall. And of course, I hope we'll get the comments here that will say, yeah, but installation comes first. Yes, absolutely. Well, where you can, right? So there are limits to how much installation can be done, I would think. Now, let's take a look at the third document, which is almost the most interesting in many ways, because it's the one that tells you how much you are going to be replacing your radiators. And they show you on the left-hand side what you have, and on the right-hand side whether they're keeping things or whether they're adding new radiators or replacing. Now, my reading of this is that they're essentially keeping a large number of those radiators, but they are dimensioning additional radiators to make sure that there is enough power. So you can see this 10.2 kilowatt for the house. First of all, you can see the 50 degrees Celsius dimension for minus 3 degrees Celsius outside, and all those radiators, they are being added so that, well, essentially you can have this lower flow temperature in the home. Now, that is very interesting because you can see, for instance, even on the very first bathroom that has this tiny radiator and is super cold at the minute, and the window needs to be changed, but you can see it will be changed by a 1.68 meters radiator versus currently it's 45 centimeters. And you can see that you're looking at a nearly times 8 times 10 in terms of the potential power or energy dissipated by the radiator. So quite a different scale here. I note also that in the lounge area, we are talking about having 4 radiators now instead of 2. That is a lot. That is a lot. Right. So overall, I think good confidence that they are dimensioning so that the system works. What you don't want to do is you don't want to put a heat pump and then find that you've got just your old radiators and then you complain because nothing works. That's my understanding of some of the research I've done so far. And here, at least, I've got good confidence that they would be replacing the radiators as needed. Do I have confidence that the radiators would look good? No, I don't, right? And I think if we now come to conclusion, I think there were a couple of questions we had going into this survey. Number one, is the house going to be cold? On the basis of this and this alone and maybe a bit more research, I would say I don't think so. I think despite insulation being far from perfect in the home, I think it's going to work. I think they are dimensioning the system such that you get heat in the winter. So that's number one, that's very important. Number two, there is a question of, well, is that going to be ugly and noisy? And frankly, we're not really answering that question, although they did mention that because it's 43 dBA, I guess, there's going to be a need for permission from the neighbor because you need a 42 or below. I think the latest are probably not that noisy, but that remains a question, and that would be something you would have to check for yourself and you would need to see in a showroom or something like that. The third question was, yeah, but how much disruption is there? And I think on the look of it, just looking at this, I think it's a lot of disruption. Yeah, this can't be minimized. This is not a like-for-like replacement. This is a big deal. Number four, there is the question of, is it gonna cost in? In my book, this would come out to be a very similar thing in terms of how much we would be spending. Essentially, you've divided by 3 or 3.5 the amount of energy for heating, but you end up paying pretty much 3 to 4 times as much on electricity because the unit price of electricity is about 3 to 4 times as much, even if it's offset slightly by some cheaper night tariffs, but don't expect to use that much of it. I mean, I don't really care for a hot house during midnight and 4 in the morning. Okay, so does that cost in? Yes, in terms of running costs, but don't expect to pay back the upfront investment and try to say, well, it was £5,000 more, so I'm going to be saving X on a per month basis, and therefore I've got to pay back that. No, I don't think that would be my calculation for this. I think it's more a case of, well, we are using a more recent technology that is more adapted, frankly, to living with the climate that we're in. And therefore, the thing that it does is it divides by 3 the energy and especially the amount of gas it's using, and that should be a good thing in itself, right? So it is a more costly thing. That's my take anyway on this quote alone. And again, feel free to disagree or provide comments. And then there's a final thing, and that's probably the showstopper for us in many ways on this. Yes, it's a big project, but more than that, it's one where you end up with 4 radiators in your living room. And with just this quote, and maybe it's a case of investigating more, I mean, I don't think that is something that as a family, as a group, we are going to be willing to accept at this stage anyway. And on that basis, yes, it's going to be hot enough, but frankly, that's probably a bit too many radiators, especially in a home where storage is at a bit of a premium, right? So I think these were a few thoughts on the heat pump quote. Maybe we're reading a bit too much. Maybe there are other things. Please let me know your experience. Have you had the quotes? Have you considered? Have you gone ahead? What did you think of Octopus? All of that is, I think, quite interesting. It feels to me that it's still early days. Of course, there's countries where they must have them, have had them for years and years now, and probably decades. But you know, heat pumps in this country with this kind of subsidies, I think it is still early days in many ways, and that's where it's still interesting to hear thoughts from everyone, especially real people having done the real install. So these were the thoughts for today. Many thanks if you've been watching through, and please subscribe, place comments, and I'll talk to you soon.